9. Mark Twitchell. Canadian amateur filmmaker Mark Twitchell was obsessed with the Dexter TV series, which follows the exploits of a fictional serial killer who helps solve murders as a blood splatter expert at his day job and claims his victims at night. It inspired Twitchell to get in touch with his own dark side, and in 2008, he posed as a woman on a dating website and lured his first victim to his home in Edmonton, Alberta. As instructed by his date, Giles Tetrod entered through the home's partially open garage door. Almost instantly, he was assaulted by a man in a hockey mask who shocked him with a stun baton. The attacker also appeared to have a gun, but Tetrod fought back anyway. He grabbed the gun and realized it was fake and managed to escape after a brief struggle. Initially, Tetrod was too embarrassed to report the crime. Just days later, 38-year-old Johnny Altinger went to Twitchell's house also expecting to meet a woman from a dating site. He failed to return, and his friends received a cryptic email claiming he'd run off to Costa Rica with the woman he'd met. Knowing something was gravely wrong, they reported Altinger missing and gave police a copy of the directions he followed to reach his date's house. It led officers to Twitchell's garage, where they found blood spatter. In the suspect's car, they found Altinger's blood as well as a bloody knife. Twitchell's laptop contained a deleted document describing his recent violence against Altinger and Giles Tetrod. It was disguised as a fictional story but aligned with the evidence perfectly. After seeing a photo of his attacker's mask during a police conference, Tetrod came forward and identified himself as Twitchell's first victim. As the evidence against him continued to mount, Twitchell admitted to killing Altinger but claimed it was in self-defense. However, the police knew he wasn't telling the truth. Based on the evidence, they believed Twitchell hit Altinger in the head with a pipe, stabbed him to death, and then dismembered his remains before discarding them in a local manhole. Twitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was consequently sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. 8. Mark Valente. When a young autistic man named Yahon Fuller vanished from his home in Douglasville, Georgia in 2021, his parents immediately knew something was wrong. They found a handwritten note that was left behind stating, "I'm going west to improve my own life by finding work. Goodbye, I love you." Because the teen wasn't very social and spent most of his time playing video games, the family suspected that he'd been lured away by someone he met online. Yahon deleted his messaging history before he left, leaving no immediate clues about who he might be with. The next day, Yahon's brother received bizarre Instagram messages from him. One of them stated that he'd gone west to get a better job due to the high poverty rates in the South, and that he'd saved up his money ahead of time and was fine. This message was especially weird because Yahon had never held a job before in his life. Law enforcement traced the messages to Eastchester, New York, about 20 miles north of Manhattan, where FBI agents found Yahon hiding in a closet at the home of 26-year-old Mark Valente. Yahon was reunited with his family, and Valente was taken into custody with plans to extradite him to Georgia to face criminal charges. The Douglas County Sheriff's Department told Fox 5 DC that the suspect drove to Georgia and picked Yahon up at his house before taking him to New York. Yahon's mother, LaShonda Collins, was shocked that her son had managed to develop an online relationship with someone despite her efforts to monitor his internet activity. She urged other parents to be vigilant when it comes to protecting their kids from online predators. 7. Donald Smith. Single mother Rain Periwinkle was shopping at a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida with her 3 kids one evening in 2013, when a man noticed she was struggling to afford things. He offered to take the family to a nearby Walmart and buy them clothes with a gift card he claimed to have. Rain normally didn't trust strangers, but was under the impression that the man's wife would be meeting them at the store, which made the situation seem safe. Her kids also really needed clothes, so she thought it would be alright to take him up on his offer. While they were shopping, the man offered to buy cheeseburgers at a McDonald's restaurant located inside the store. One of the children, 8-year-old Cherish, went with him. By the time Rain went to meet up with them at the checkout, they had slipped out of the store and the man's vehicle was no longer in the parking lot. She called the police immediately and an Amber Alert was issued. Officers spotted the kidnapper's van the next morning and pulled him over. The man was identified as 56-year-old Donald Smith, a career predator with previous convictions for harming young victims. Her remains were found a little while later in a creek behind a church. which told a devastating story of the suffering she endured at the hands of her abductor. To make matters even worse, Smith had only been released from jail just 3 weeks before he killed the young girl. During his trial, Smith was found guilty and he was convicted of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to death. 6. Valerie Rosario. In early 2022, a 24-year-old man agreed to meet up with a woman who flirted with him on Instagram. He went to an address in the Bronx where 22-year-old Valerie Rosario welcomed him inside and offered him a drink. Just moments later, 3 masked men stormed into the apartment and pistol-whipped him. For several hours, the group tortured the victim. They doused him with flammable liquid and set him on fire, beat him up and forced him to FaceTime a family member, demanding a $100,000 ransom. During the conversation, one of the attackers cut the man with a knife and threatened to kill him if the relative didn't pay up. NYPD detectives worked diligently to track down the suspects and hopefully rescue the victim. They traced one of the alleged accomplices, Javier Vargas, to an address in Queens where they found him sitting in a van. Officers discovered the victim clinging to life in the back of the vehicle. He was barely breathing and his mouth was duct taped shut. Authorities charged Rosario with kidnapping and attempted murder and have charged 2 suspected accomplices for their roles in the crime. Prosecutors believe Rosario targeted the victim because of the obvious displays of wealth he showed in his Instagram photos. She's being held at Rikers Island without bail while her case works its way through the court system. 5. Deadly date. On the evening of November 7, 2019, 25-year-old Marta Calvo Buron left her home in Valencia, Spain to meet a man she matched with on a dating site, but she never returned. Investigators traced her last known whereabouts to the rental home of a 37-year-old convicted drug dealer from Colombia named Jorge Ignacio Palma. Earlier that year, police had investigated Palma in connection with the suspicious death of a prostitute who was found suffering from convulsions in her room just moments after he left the brothel. Her cause of death initially appeared to be an accidental drug overdose, but detectives revisited the case after Calvo's disappearance and found evidence that the overdose was forced. Palmer briefly went into hiding after Calvo's disappearance, but eventually surrendered to authorities at his family's urging. During questioning, he confessed to dismembering Calvo and discarding her body parts in various garbage bins throughout the area. He claimed her death was accidental and that it happened when a kinky bedroom game they were playing went horribly wrong. An exhaustive search failed to turn up any sign of Calvo, but yielded evidence of Palmer being involved in at least 2 other women's deaths. He was also accused of drugging and assaulting at least 2 women. Palmer was convicted on 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Authorities believe he's responsible for several other murders throughout Europe that remain unsolved. 4. Kane Thomas Fairbank. A few days after meeting a woman from Tinder for the first time, 18-year-old Kane Thomas Fairbank made plans to see her again at a park near Bountiful, Utah. After spending several hours together, he allegedly coerced the woman into his car and stabbed her repeatedly in a completely unprovoked attack. The victim fled the vehicle with injuries to her face, hands, and neck. Fairbank caught up with her and stabbed her in the back in an attempt to stop her from getting away. However, this didn't play out in Fairbank's favor. The woman's wounds were life-threatening, but she kept running and caught the attention of a nearby group of park visitors who dialed 911. Fairbank got in his car and drove to a gas station, where he abandoned the vehicle. During the drive, he tried to destroy his and the woman's phones in order to get rid of evidence. He then went out and stabbed an innocent 64-year-old woman who was injured but survived. A civilian spotted the suspect shortly after the second stabbing and detained him until police arrived. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated attempted murder, 1 count of aggravated kidnapping and obstruction of justice. Fairbank reportedly told investigators that he had fun committing the violent crimes and would do it again if given the chance. He said that he had plans to kill multiple people, but that his main objective that day was to murder his Tinder date. Disturbing surveillance footage shows the young man sitting in a holding cell and talking to himself, stating that he wished he'd picked a sharper weapon and that he enjoyed the sound of his knife plunging into the first victim's back. According to the most recent update on the case, the judge ordered a mental evaluation to determine whether Fairbank is competent to stand trial. 3. Diabolical teens. After seeing a visibly vulnerable man walking around with one shoe on in the English city of Leigh one morning in 2021, 3 young men lured him to a quiet spot near the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. They brutally attacked him and then shoved him into the canal. As he screamed for help and tried to get out of the water, the teens continued to strike him until he lost consciousness. Sadly, the victim died from his injuries. About an hour later, the killers returned to the site to see the aftermath of their crime. They visited the crime scene again after the man's body was discovered, and they filmed the police activity. An autopsy determined that the victim, 33-year-old Scott Anderton, was stabbed at least 35 times. Some of the cuts were so deep that they pierced his bones. He also suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head. Surveillance footage and other clues led detectives to suspect 18-year-old Liam Bailey as well as 2 other young men. Bailey was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with a minimum sentence of 23 years. One of his co-conspirators was found guilty of the same charge and was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison. The third suspect is serving a minimum 10-year sentence for a manslaughter conviction. 2. Haley Rose Bustos. In 2016, 27-year-old single father Adam Hillary went on what he thought was a successful first date with a woman he met on the Plenty of Fish dating app. After a night out bowling in Auburndale, Florida, he invited 18-year-old Haley Rose Bustos to his apartment, where they spent some time together before he drove her home. Later that night, Bustos texted Hillary, saying that she had a good time and wanted to see him again. This likely came as good news to Hillary, who was freshly single and looking for a connection after ending a years-long relationship with his child's mother about a month earlier. Little did he know Bustos was telling her friends about all the valuables she observed inside Hillary's apartment. During the early morning hours, she returned to the residence with 3 co-conspirators who forced Hillary to his knees and stole his electronics, cash, and jewelry. During the robbery, Hillary told the intruders he had a 5-year-old daughter and pleaded with them not to kill him. He cooperated with all their demands, but it didn't stop them from mercilessly shooting him in the head execution style. The shooter, Andre Warner, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Bustos took a deal and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and theft in exchange for a 25-year sentence. The 2 other suspects, Joshua Ellington and Gary Gray, also faced murder charges but were spared from the death penalty. Unfortunately, the outcomes of their cases are unclear. 1. Unidentified victim. In 2009, a woman's lifeless body was dumped and set on fire in the parking lot of a business complex in Irvine, California. Unfortunately, the victim's identity remains a mystery to this day. More than a year after her body was found, police charged brothers Zenaido Valdivia Guzman and Gabino Valdivia Guzman with her murder. Prosecutors allege that Gabino approached the woman in Santa Ana and convinced her to get into his van. When she realized that Zenaido was also in the vehicle, she began screaming and tried to escape. Zenaido strangled the woman to death while Gabino drove to Irvine, where they discarded her remains. A jury found Zenaido guilty of first-degree murder in 2022, and he's facing up to a lifetime behind bars. Gabino also faces a first-degree murder charge but has yet to go to trial. Authorities are determined to identify the victim. They're hoping a member of the public recognizes her in the sketch they released and comes forward to help. Would you rather be catfished by someone who looks nothing like the photos in their dating profile and who you find completely unattractive, or pay ahead for a large order of Girl Scout cookies only to realize that you were swindled by an innocent-looking door-to-door thief? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time. Bye.